Hey guys, Mrs. Gore here. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the night chapter summaries for you. So I'm going to do 7 through 9 all within this video. Because if you've read, as you should, you know it's only about 20 pages for these 3 chapters and they all follow each other pretty quickly. So when we left off with chapter 6, chapter 7 now, they've been put back into cattle cars and they're traveling. They don't know exactly where, they just know they're trying to get them deeper into Germany. The cattle cars are a little different this time, however, because they're all open at the top. There's no roof, and we know it's still winter. It's still snowing heavily. And now there's 100 of them per cattle car instead of 80 because they're so skinny, they're so frail and thin. Every time they stop, they throw out all the dead bodies. They're just tossing bodies out. And Ellie's dad is almost thrown out. They think he's dead. Thankfully, Ellie's able to save him. He slaps him in the face and gets him to wake up to prove to these men that his dad is still alive. And we also see a lot of violence in chapter 7, not just amongst the prisoners on the cattle car, but when they pull into town, we see these villagers tossing bread into the cattle car, and then they are laughing, they're amused, they're entertained by watching these prisoners fight over each other. They're killing each other for these scraps of bread. And these villagers are so entertained by this and just continue to do it as they travel. When this happens, we see a young boy, Mir, who ends up killing his own father over a piece of bread. His dad had 2 pieces of bread, and his son attacks him, and he's begging him. He's like, "My son, this is for you, this is for you." And he ends up killing his own father just for that piece of bread. Remember, they've not eaten in days at this point. They've been running, marching, traveling. Mentally, emotionally, physically, they are not healthy in any sense of that word. Finally, when chapter 7 ends, they arrive at Buchenwald, and Ellie's 16 at that point. So, chapter 8, when they get to Buchenwald, they're having to wait outside to shower. They want them all to shower, but there's too many of them, so they're standing, just kind of congregating. And this is where we see Ellie's dad really weaken and start to just really deplete as a human. He wants to rest. Ellie's telling him, "Come on, Dad, stand up. We need to move." And he says, "No, my son, leave me alone. I've done too much. I've been through too much." And he eventually is able to get his father showered and moved. But the next day when he wakes up, his father's very sick. He's been put in the bunk with all the sick people, so they're not feeding them and they're not giving them water. Ellie gives his dad some of his rations, some of his portions, but his dad really has no interest in eating much. He just keeps saying he's thirsty. And he's getting worse and worse every day. He has dysentery at this point, so the doctors that Ellie tries to seek out tell him, there's nothing we can do to assist your father. You simply need to let him kind of phase out these last couple days. And then the other prisoners start to warn Ellie that he shouldn't be giving his dad his rations because his dad's just getting weaker and Ellie needs to be getting stronger. And things continue to get worse for Ellie's dad. He is laying in bed one night. He's underneath Ellie's bunk, and he's been telling Ellie how the other prisoners are beating him because he's so weak, so they can get rations and things from him. So Ellie does get a bunk near him. However, one night his dad's screaming out to him, screaming his name, "I'm thirsty, my son, please, please help me." And he keeps telling his dad to be quiet, and he won't. All the other prisoners are irritated, like we've seen many times. They get very irritated with each other when their schedule's disrupted or when someone's not following suit. And so eventually an SS officer walks up to him and tells him to shut up. He's hitting him, and finally he ends up with one final blow to the head that ends up killing Ellie's dad. Ellie falls asleep that night. He's too afraid to move, to walk down to check on his dad. He says he's too just kind of out of it to even cry. He doesn't have an emotional response to this. And when he wakes up the next morning, it's January 29th, 1945, his father's body is gone, and there's a new person in the bunk, so he knows that his father has been taken to the crematoria. And This chapter ends, like I said, where he says he can't weep, he can't cry. He says, the only thought that came to my mind was free at last. And I hope that helps you fully understand how much Ellie's identity has been stripped away, and how much of it has just been depleted from his being. Look back to chapter 1, the devotion, the love, just admiration he held for his dad, and now he's thankful in a sense that he's gone. We know that, of course, he doesn't want his dad to be dead, but given the situation, given the context and everything in that moment, that's what was easiest for Ellie. So, brings us to our last chapter, chapter 9. Chapter 9 jumps ahead because Elie Wiesel says he doesn't like to talk about those days following his dad's death. He doesn't really remember them. He's very detached emotionally. We can, say depressed would be a very underwhelming word to use to describe, I would imagine, how he's feeling. They're not eating very much, so he says that's his only focus during these days, is to stay alive, to get some sort of nutrient, some sort of food. We see them eating blades of grass, anything they can find. The front is closer, and they should have been liquidated. However, the resistance, there's this underground group who refuses to let them go. So they take over, and they keep the prisoners there. The SS have left. They're gone. April 10th, we jump to, and we're at about 20,000 prisoners at this point left in the camp. And like I said, at this point for 6 days, Ellie and the other children, because he's in a children block, have only eaten grass. The resistance are starting to attack them. They're killing other prisoners. Thankfully, like I said, Ellie's in this bunk with children. He's not harmed by the resistance. And by 6 p.m. that evening, the first American tank lands at Buchenwald in attempt to liquidate and obviously free the prisoners who are left. I think this is kind of an underwhelming moment to read because we think he's finally free. But he says all he and the other prisoners could focus on was the rations. They all attack this food. There's no emotion. There's no really understanding still of what's happening. They're still in this survival mode of just wanting to eat and finally having food substance once again in their bodies. One of the most ironic moments follows this. Elie Wiesel is hospitalized for 2 weeks post-liquidation, post his freedom from the concentration camps due to food poisoning, out of all things. He spends 2 weeks in a hospital bouncing between life and death. Thankfully, he survives. And we end our novel with him looking at his reflection in the hospital, and he says he no longer sees himself but just a corpse staring back at him. And that's what ends our novel. If you guys have any questions over these final chapters as you're completing your assessment, please reach out. I know this is a hard book emotionally to read, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some perspective on identity, on oppression, on all of those things we've been discussing all year. If you need anything, reach out. I'm here for you. Nice job, guys. See you later.